I was around 22 to 23 years old when this happened. I'm a woman living in Southeast Asia, and around here, witch doctors and witchcraft is widely known. When somebody says they went to a witch doctor to get healed, it was acceptable, and people just nodded unless they're a skeptic themselves, which is rare. With that said, there was a lot of belief in the supernatural and curses in this area. There was a time where my girlfriend used to somewhat live at our house days at a time. She would go home on weekends to get new clothes and come right back. Her family situation was bad, and getting her out of there eases the stress on both of us. In our house stayed my mom, little sister, our maid who had been with us since I was in high school, and then me and my girlfriend. When our maid was new to us, she was attentive, the type who handed us drinks on a saucer plate or coaster if available. And she probably thought we were a snob family, unlike her last, which was untrue, as we were still a casual middle type family. In our country, maids or domestic helpers are very common, and you don't have to be that rich to afford their services, and most maids are stay-in, which was the case for ours. She's an unmarried woman, around her late 30s, and based from the years of observation and experience with her, she's a spiteful woman. She's manipulative to everyone by saying that, "Your mom told me that you should," or "She said that," then something that she wanted you to do or believe. She's never taking responsibility or blame for anything she's ever said if the other person didn't tell her, or tell her others' command or sentence. This caused a lot of problems between me and my mom, before that almost led to me to kill myself. I was almost successful if the belt didn't get loose from the tie I made. It was that bad. But she still does this to this day, using the name of another person to do her bidding. Don't ask me why she's still with us. If I have the power to choose, she had been long gone. But my mother is too nice, and her argument is, at least she's not a thief. We can deal with her attitude. Our maid also lies a lot to my aunt, who lives next door. She tells them stories of how my girlfriend asks her to wash her dirty laundry, which was false, because we don't want to ask her to do that, as to not get any bad rep in the first place, because we know that she would say things like these. But she did anyway, along with other lies that my girlfriend eats our food, empty the fridge and stuff like that. And, stupidly enough, my aunt believed her. This caused my aunt to give a scolding to my girlfriend that made her confidence and self-esteem go down even more, and she was already suffering enough with depression and anxiety. When the opportunity came for my girlfriend to get a job, she took it. At first, the workplace was near our home, so the commute was okay, but then they got relocated to a city about 2 hours away and even farther from her own home. So again, she opted to stay at my place because it was closer. Of course, our maid didn't like that at all, because it was another person to serve in her mind. Not sure why though, as we mostly kept to ourselves beside the food prep. My girlfriend, let's call her L, has diagnosed mild depression and anxiety, but her anxiety was at peak at this point, and this was the time I got a lot of phone calls from emergency services and ambulances to pick her up because she was panicking, hyperventilating, crying, and fighting to escape the paramedics. A part of her anxiety was she could never be around a crowd or near a stranger, as she was scared they would suddenly hurt her. One time, she was held up at a train station control room because the train she was in was packed and had a breakdown. She attempted to end it all and jump in the tracks, and everyone there didn't know what to do. I went and picked her up and called her manager to let her know she won't be coming to work that day. She went to work once and got a termination letter that same day. She went home crying and panicking as she told me that. The exit interview as per company procedures scheduled a few days after never happened, as we waited with her, me and a friend at the office. The person that was conducting the interview said the meeting was at 11 p.m., and we got there at 10, as we didn't want to be late. A few hours went by and we kept asking the lady behind the desk if the person was there, and she said that it was, but in a meeting or some sort. So okay. We waited a few more hours, but when it reached 3 a.m., we had had enough, and Elle's anxiety was peaking. We left the office without speaking to the interviewer. Elle tried to jump from the 3rd floor that night, and we held her back. It was her anger issue and anxiety kicking in. By the time we got out of the building, she was hyperventilating, and guards patrolling the area thought she was on drugs as she was curling on the floor, having an attack. I told them to stay away, as she needed the space to calm down. They did, and left us be. We were also back and forth to the mental institutions for a meeting with the psychologist and restock on her meds. This happened twice every month, and the psychologist recommended for her to get an evaluation exam to determine her mental state. The hospital was a public one, and the wait for the exam was 3 months long unless you paid a hefty amount and you could schedule it within a week. Well, we didn't have the money, so we opted to wait. The day of the exam came, and she was staying at her house that time, so I messaged her, asking if she was at the hospital. She said she was and was doing okay, so it eased my worry. But she sent a picture of trees and nature in what seems to be an area. I asked her where she was, and she said she was at the hospital again, but elaborated a different kind of hospital. She was at the province at a house of a witch doctor who took her in. I was livid. Not because she was at a witch doctor, but because we waited months for the exam, and on the day itself, she chose to ditch it and lie to me about it. She said the witch doctor was helping her heal from her depression and anxiety, and that mostly of her anxiety was caused by, you guessed it, our maid. I didn't find it unbelievable, as our maid came from an area where the low-class lives that came from a provincial region where it was well known for witchcraft. And our maid even shouted threats at her at one point, where we were about to leave the house for the day, and suddenly, out of nowhere, started cursing at her. No triggers or anything. I told my mother everything before we went, and demanded she got fired by the time we come home. Later that day, I got a lot of calls and texts from our maid, begging me for forgiveness. Never forgave her, and to this day, we were at a Cold War situation. So yeah, I do believe that our maid was responsible for her anxiety because until now, I never saw her having a panic attack again, except for the general anxiety of a normal person. Elle said that the witch doctor advised her to never return to our area as there were a lot of these black magic practitioners and her curse would return. She took it to heart and never returned to our place, so I just went over to hers. Fine by me, as long as there's no more emergency calls. We haven't been back to the psychologist or bought meds anymore after healing either. One day though, Elle told us to go visit the witch doctor with her. So me, my cousin, Elle's friend who instructed her and introduced her to the witch doctor, his friend, Elle's brother and sister all packed in a car, went to this area for a visit. I thought it was just your typical witch doctor visit, though I have been to a few before where I would go with my grandfather and waited outside. But this time it was different. Much more different. We got there, a rural area with trees all over, with a few houses in between. It wasn't scary or creepy, just an average setting where you can see farm animals freely walking in a fenced property. The house was also normal, but not well paved, but more modern than bamboos and wood together. And the witch doctor was a nice person. I would not go into details about them, because it is against the rule to tell specifics, as there are a lot of bad persons, entities, and black witches who can go after them. Anyway, they just talked, but they were talking like they were possessed by another person or being. I forgot to say, but I am deadly afraid of witch doctors, or faith healers by the way, simply because of the fact that they are so real. So I just pretended to be okay and stood there, listening and watching the scene before me. Elle's sister and me occasionally glanced at each other to silently ask, "Do you believe them?" I gave her a shrug, as I do not want to disrespect any of them in their own territory. In the midst of their talk, they would casually bring up that they were hurting somewhere, and the witch doctor would do hand movements on that body part and pretend to stab something in the air, and the person said the pain was gone. I still stood there and pretended everything was normal, like the other in the room. Even if I wanted to leave the place, I couldn't, because we only had one ride and it was dark outside. I didn't know they were planning to stay the night. Then, the healing began. I forgot who the first to go, but everybody went through it, except my skeptic cousin. The witch doctor held a normal pen between your fingers, be it your toe or your hands, and circled it in the same spot as they held the 2 fingers close with the pen in between. This was to cast the evil spirit out and reveal itself. I went out of the room because I was afraid that my energy or fear would make them fail the ritual, like how those who are afraid of the devil should leave the immediate area in case of a transfer possession. Suddenly, Elle told the witch doctor that I was possessed by something. Not possessed in an exorcist kind of way, but more like something is attached to me and that I needed the help. Now I was shocked because this wasn't part of the plan. It felt as a surprise healing, like the surprise overnight to that place. I felt like myself and wasn't depressed or anything. Perfectly normal in my mind, so I'm not entirely sure why she thought I needed help. Was it my PTSD? It was very sudden, and I wasn't prepared. Let me clarify. I don't drink, smoke, or take drugs. None of us had a drink that night either, so everybody was sober. I didn't know what else to do but comply, lest they think that I'm actually possessed if I refuse the healing. That would make things worse. So I sat there, doctor holding my foot with a pen between the big toe and the one next to it, holding it close around the pen. Elle held my right hand and they began to circle the pen. It hurts a lot, and the more they did it, the more it hurt, as actual blisters form on the skin around the pen. It was hell. I thrashed around and cried, trying to break free from the torture. Everyone in the room except Elle's sister held me down, on my legs, my arms and shoulders, as if I fought with all my strength. All while the doctor shouted questions at me, or wailed to tell the entity attached to me. This is where it gets hazy, as the pain was intolerable. They asked me questions like, "Who are you? What do you want with her? Why did you abuse her?" And to make it worse, I still don't feel different from my normal self. At this point, I prayed that whoever possessing me would actually take over and endure this if they were real. But there was none. It was only me and a bunch of people holding me down as the doctor continued the torture. To make it all stop, I answered with the first words that came to my mind as I shouted and cried. This seemed to make them calm down, and to my relief, the ritual eventually ended. Everybody drew a breath of relief as they cast the evil entity out, except for my cousin and Elle's sister. I later talked to her and found out that she felt the same, just answered all the same questions to get out of the situation. I think she also had a trauma about it, the same as I did. I had a big open blister between my toes, caused by the pen, and they left me alone after that. I avoided going back into the room and stayed around the living area until they decided to sleep in another room. I too went to sleep. In the morning, as I was anxious to go home, waiting outside the house for them was taking too long, and I eventually went inside the car to cry myself out. The shame and anger overtook me, and I bawled while they were taking their sweet time bidding farewell. The doctor's questions that night was really intrusive, and I basically shouted shameful words regarding the cause of my PTSD to everybody in the room, including the ones who didn't know about it. And no, it did not heal my PTSD. I still have it, and will probably for the rest of my life, and the experience didn't help me deal with it either. It just became another trauma. It was the most humiliating experience of my life so far. The only good thing about it was that Elle sort of found her peace in it, and helps her deal with day to day, and she's a better person now. They continue to remain in contact, but as for me, I do not want to go inside that house anymore, as they might conduct another healing ritual on me. I don't mind what her beliefs are, if they help her, but please, leave me out of it.